You heard the story about Kobe used to wake up 2 hours before everybody else to get 2 hours more of training done during the day. I think it was 2 or 3 hours. It's
Yeah.
crazy. Being great is a lonely, kind of miserable spot at times, right? You're kind of in your own, and then you have to trust the process because, like you said, like you sat the bench and then you put in the work and you became great, but you had to trust all that invested time in doing the work would get you to where you want to go. And that's wrestling in a nutshell. Wrestling, it's crazy. You get some weight room time, you get some mat time, and it's really crazy in wrestling. Over any other sport that I see, mat time is directly correlated with wins more than any other sport. I mean, but the fascinating thing about your story is we hear about this genetic component, right? Like this genetic component, genetic freaks, and they exist. But it doesn't sound like you just walked on the baseball field and had a starting spot. It's like, oh, you sat the tournament, but then you willed yourself to work. Obviously, there's a genetic component to you being able to work to that level. But if you wouldn't have put in that work, that genetic component would not have shown. So when everybody cries genetics, or drugs, it's like, have you ever actually tried? Like, have you ever gone after school and trained for 4 hours every single day, 5 to 6 days a week? The people who generally complain about some weird genetic component or about everybody being on drugs, even when they're not, they're usually the ones who've never actually tried to do it.
Mm-hmm. Genetics do matter, especially
They do.
when you get to an elite level, and I have found in my life, I have worked very hard at things that I was naturally gifted at, and I've worked very hard at things that I was not naturally gifted at. And generally, my experience has been that you can get about 2 standard deviations better at anything simply by working hard at it. So if you start out and you're just not very good, you're in the 15th percentile genetically. If you work very, very hard, you can get to the 85th percentile in terms of performance. Now, that might not mean you're going to be on an elite level. You might just have really bad bodybuilding genetics, and the best you can do is an above average physique. Okay, that's good. An above average physique is much better than a significantly below average physique. But it does mean that if you want to be at the elite level, which is the top 10th of 1%, you can be in the top 10th of 1% if you're simply slightly above average genetically. You're probably not going to be in the top 10th of 1% if you're below average genetically. But if you're in the 80th percentile or something like that, 85th percentile in terms of natural proclivity, and you work your ass off, you can definitely get into the triple sigma type performers, 3 standard deviations above the mean, top 10th of the top 1%. And that was my experience where, I felt that as an athlete, I was probably naturally about 1 standard deviation above the mean. My muscle building genetics are definitely better than the average person. I'm strong, not just because I put in hours of work in the weight room, but I started out stronger than the average person. But, in order to play professional baseball, that's 1/10 of 1% of people who play in high school ultimately have the opportunity to play professionally. That wouldn't have happened if I didn't put the work in. In fact, if I didn't put the work in, I would have never even played in college. Maybe I would have started for a year or 2 on my high school varsity team, but the outcome would have been very similar to everybody else that I grew up with. And so if you want to have elite performance, almost certainly 9 out of 10 of those people are putting in elite work ethic. Yes, there are people who are insanely talented who are just jackasses and waste their talent and don't put the work in. But by and large, if you get to an elite level, most of the people there are working very, very hard because they're all replaceable, right? At the end of the day, people don't realize that whether you're at Google, at Goldman Sachs, or at Vanderbilt, or with the Colorado Rockies, the lower half of performers would be instantly interchangeable with the upper half of performers who did not make it. So if you were to swap out the upper half of a AA team with the lower half of a major league team, you would not notice on a day-to-day basis.
Really?
You may notice on a week-to-week basis or a month-to-month basis, but no, if you kept the 12 best guys on the major league team and you took the 12 worst guys and you swapped them out for the 12 best guys in AA or AAA, the team wouldn't do as well, but it wouldn't be immediately noticeable because there's so much churn between those 2 levels anyway, that if you didn't do that and you just waited 9 months, half of that process would have happened anyway, sending guys up, sending guys down. And the same thing is true that I found out working at Google. They hired talented people. I assume they still do, but it's probably not as much as 10 years ago, because their hiring demands are so much larger. They hired smart people, but so did other companies. And if you looked at the top performing employees at, say, a Salesforce or a company that had standards, but not quite to the level of Google, they were probably better hires than the bottom half of hires at Google. They don't tell you that because they don't want you to feel good about staying there and climbing the ranks. But the reality is every elite institution features 50% of its members that are perfectly interchangeable with others who did not make the first cut, but are working tirelessly to take their spot.
That is wild. I think Mark Cuban said back when he was cool, he said, work every day like there's someone else working 24 hours a day to take your job or something like that. It was a paraphrase. And that makes complete sense because someone's trying to take your job. It's a very competitive workforce, especially once you move up, right? Like entry-level jobs are easy. But once you get up to those really competitive C-suite or even upper management jobs, they're extremely competitive. So you always have to stay on top of your game. You always have to continually educate, continually evolve, continually learn. Like think about who got left behind. There's a lot of people who are executives and then like social media hit and then the internet hit. Imagine if you're a marketing manager and the internet hits and all of a sudden your kids know more than you do about the main driver of society. Like that's how wild it is. And now we have AI. There's so many things people have to keep up with. So moving on, you see how Alex did great there is we went into, okay, athletics. Okay. A lot of people watching this probably might play now, but how does this all translate into work? How does this translate into the real world? Because look, I coach, you've been to my facility. We coach thousands of athletes. I've coached thousands of kids. I could count on one hand how many kids went pro. And we're pretty good at what we do. We've had NFL, we've had some other organizations, but like, yeah, it's very rare that someone goes pro. So when you're doing a sport, when you're developing that work ethic in high school and college, that's really preparing you for the real world. And it's just like we had a big debate because a kid was kind of roughed up during a wrestling match the other week, right? And a lot of people were upset that it wasn't medically forfeited, but the kid was fine. He didn't have a concussion. No bone was poking out. The coach had him finish the match, even though it was going to end in a technical fall. And a lot of people were upset at this, but I understand what the coach was doing in real life. That kid's not going to wrestle probably past high school, certainly not past college, because there's nothing past college except the Olympics. So the lesson he learned is no matter how hard you get dropped on your head, you have to get up and you have to keep fighting. Because nobody cares. Yeah. Nobody cares. The world doesn't care. I like when people say, oh, they're just against me. Dude, people don't care enough to be against you. Like people just don't care. Like when you realize how insignificant you are in the grand scheme of the world, you'll understand that no. The man is not holding you back. They're not being mean to you because you have red hair or brown skin. They just don't care. And if you're not creating an undeniable revenue gain for the company you're working with, or you're not providing anything tangible, I don't care about your DEI and all this woke stuff in corporations. At the end of the day, corporations want people to make them money. This is not a nonprofit. And even if it is a nonprofit, that just means they don't show a profit. They're still a for-profit. CEO is still making $500K a year at least. So I just love when people think that the world cares about them. Because the world doesn't. And that's what sports teaches you. Look, man, we sat down with Corbin, greatest guy ever, Coach Corbin at Vandy. But dude, if you weren't doing your job on that field, doesn't matter how nice of a guy you were, he'd have cut you. Yeah. He'll tell you that right now, probably too. If you would have, I would have cut you. He would have said that straight up.
Well, certainly now. Back then, they, as long as you had a good attitude and you weren't taking up too much scholarship money, you could have a slot on the team when there was unlimited roster sizes. But now there's roster limits, and so a lot of guys are getting cut. But sports teach you, and this is a great lesson for men. And male sports are different than female sports because you can't coach men and women the same way. But sports teach men that nobody cares unless you do something. Literally, nobody cares. Oh, you have an opinion, you have a joke, nobody cares, right? Don't even talk if you're not winning. And if we were talking too loud on the bus after losses, that would be a way for Coach Corbin to just, get on our asses for, what is so funny. And so performance was very black and white as an athlete. It's very clear if you won or you lost. It's very clear if you made the starting lineup or you didn't. And nobody cares. Nobody cares why you can't compete. You haven't competed. right? Nobody cares why you're not getting better. You're not getting better. And so if you look at the world from a frame of nobody cares unless I do something, then yeah, that's a little bit harsh. You're going to maybe create a little bit of anxiety for you. And for some people, that might be too much. But the reality is, you're never going to replicate the classroom environment in a real world setting where your teacher is going to evaluate the paper that you wrote and give you 5-7 minutes of her thought and say, oh, yeah, that's a very interesting point. Nobody's attention is free in the real world. And so if you want your teacher to grade your paper in the real world, you can't just hand it in. You have to hand it in, and the first page has to look better, not just the first page, but the first sentence. You have to give people a reason to open that email. You have to give people a reason to take your cold call. You have to give people a reason to give you the time of day. And so if you think the world's stacked against you, it's because probably you haven't given people the reason to give you a chance. And you have to learn who gets chances. Good looking people get chances. People who speak well get chances. People who've already succeeded get chances. And in that regard, life's not fair, but it can be very fair for you if you understand the patterns that winners keep on winning and winners get more doors open for them and losers don't. In fact, it's the reverse. All these patterns come into play as a competitive athlete, and it transfers amazingly well into the real world because both are jungle type settings where you have to be an elite competitor if you want to be able to thwart all the attempts to take you down, all the possible times that you might fail. It exists everywhere. And as a competitive athlete, every single day is an opportunity to both prove yourself or embarrass yourself. And the question you have to ask yourself every day is, which is it going to be? And so being able to compete at the highest level and having the mindset that's required to immediately forget mistakes if they're preventing you from performing at your peak is an essential trait that most executives unfortunately don't have if they haven't played sports or been in the military at a high level. And so this is something I teach a lot of the people who I work with. It's not always who has the greatest grasp on reality who's going to be the most successful. It's who is able to curate their own reality, to put them in a position to be productive, to do the work that's necessary to get the job done. Because if you're looking at a bunch of red ink and you're thinking, oh, this is not good. Well, there's a lot of reasons why you might think, hey, this isn't the best place for me to spend my time. I need to be a little bit more conservative in how I'm investing the company's money. But the reality is, if you do that too much, as many people will, you're going to cause your own failure. And so sports also teach you that the safest route is actually a highly aggressive one. You're much more likely to succeed swinging the bat hard than swinging the bat softly. You're much more likely to throw the ball accurately when you throw it as hard as you can than when you aim it. And a lot of people go through life aiming balls and trying to take soft swings because they think it's lower risk and they're going to be higher with their accuracy if they do it more intentionally or more deliberately. And oftentimes it's the opposite. You need to learn how to trust yourself moving at a high velocity. And that's when your accuracy is going to be the highest.
Kind of like the book, Ready, Fire, Aim. I don't know if you've read that book, but it's a lot of people, they spend time, it's paralysis by analysis, and they'll evaluate something, evaluate. When the winner's already out doing it, right? And then you evolve and you have a malleable plan where you're able to evolve as you go. But if you never started something going to get done, like so many people came to me in the early 2010s, like, I'm going to start a YouTube channel. All right. At that time camera phones weren't really a thing, right? So it's like, can you buy a camera for like $50 from Best Buy? I'm like, yeah, that's all you need. Go. Well, I need an editor, this, that. I don't know. I'm like, just upload something. Just start. Get something out there. Go. And as you go, evolve, get better, get more equipment, get better stuff. And a couple people did it, and they actually grew some really big channels. But some people are still coming up with that first video idea, that perfect content, that perfect viral moment. Dude, just go. Just do it. It might not be perfect, and you can evaluate as you go. Like, all of my companies started with a vision, and we launched and we evaluated, and then we're like, well, this is working here, but this is really working. We'll focus on this. You have constant A/B tests going on in your company, and that's where you evaluate where to go. Like when we launched Extend with Civation, it was 2004, and we had a first product called NeuroStim. It was a mental stimulus product. It was a nootropic, one of the first ones. And we're like, cool, man, we're going to have these cool, edgy things. And then I read some data and we were going over, and branch chains were just starting to be talked about. So we made it highly palatable, delicious. We could drink it during training, which based on the studies we saw, that we knew about, would be advantageous intra-workout. We ended up funding a study in 2009, which came out really well. So, I mean, that was a hypothesis, but we didn't sit back. And then we launched it. And guess what? No one bought it for like 2 years. We were trying to sell it for $5 for a 30 serving at the Arnold, and no one would buy it. That's how much it failed. But we kept going. We kept delivering. We kept modifying the message, massaging it out. We kept on the process, kept on the mission. Next thing you know, it's a multi-$100 million category within the industry. So the intra-workout category. So it's one of those things where I think people tend to overthink, but at the same time, they're lazy. They don't take action. It's the procrastination issue. A lot, like, just get it done. If you have something on your task list, just get it done. Don't procrastinate it. You have homework, get it done, then go play. Like, what? I never understood procrastination. It drives me nuts. Are you a procrastinator at all?
Let me tell you, let me explain this to you, because I spent a lot of years trying to understand the human brain, understand the irrational things that I think that both help me and hurt me. And that's how I understand the irrational things that both help and hurt other people, including the people who I work with. And so I have decided over the last 10 years, 15 years of my life, that the human brain isn't some rational computer that tells you what to do logically. It's actually an energy conservation mechanism. And so the ideas that you think are good are inevitably going to be very closely related to the thing that is going to help you conserve energy. Why do people want to stay on the couch instead of going to the gym? Because it burns fewer calories. Your brain is just trying to keep you alive. So you are going to make an excuse for why you're too tired to work out, why you're too sore to work out, why the gym is too far from your house. That's how your brain is naturally wired, because your brain is naturally wired to preserve energy. And the same thing is true when you think about what you're going to do, that business that you're going to start, that video that you're going to create. It takes less energy to think about doing it than it does doing it. And it takes less energy when you convince yourself that now's not the right time, than now is the right time. So your brain is lying to you, because your brain is designed to conserve as much energy as possible. And once you realize that your brain is not designed to tell you the truth, it's designed to conserve the most energy, you are completely liberated from actually having to follow through on the things that you think might be a good idea, because you've just been lying to yourself.